Okay, this is an overview of the first lecture for the class. And I basically look at that territory that's to the east of the Mediterranean. So we're starting off around here, um, where civilization, quote unquote, civilization begins here in Sumer. And we're going to spend a lot of time bouncing back and forth between the rise of the Hebrew people here in Israel, in the southern part of Israel, known as Judah. You'll also be looking at Egypt. And then finally, as the class first lecture begins to close, you'll start looking at the rise of the empires again in this Mesopotamia area, but also off to the east in Persia. So that being said, it's a lot to cover. And as I mentioned, as you're going to go through the lecture, you'll see a lot of attention towards the rise of monotheism. So, quick look at that. Um, Actually, monotheism begins with the Egyptians in some format. So, Hebrews are the most famous monotheist originators of it. If you go back to sacred writings of um, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, that's an earlier slide covers. It goes over the story of Abraham, his travels from Sumer to the land of Israel and Canaan, um, and this idea of monotheism is very particular to this world. This idea of the one God, and so as you'll see in your forum, you're going to be looking at passages throughout the Hebrew scriptures on just the way God is presented there, and then compare it to what you see in Babylon, Assyria, Canaanites, Persia, etc. So it's somewhat to kind of see the evolution of the idea and a kind of comparative social, religious, cultural view of things. But the video that I attached to the module that you're going to see earlier, it covers Akhenaten and his family. So Akhenaten um, is considered one of the great monotheists, even though he still believes in other gods. That his one god, the god Aten, is challenging. So the documentary goes deep into that. Um, it's an excellent documentary. Frankly, it's one of my favorites. The whole series, all three parts. But I'm just having you watch the second one. So he is one of the major ones. Even though I would say it's a monotheism, it's a type of monotheism. Um, Whereas, like with Israel, it seems clearly as what we understand is Judaism is being formed, that it's clearly becoming a religion and a culture that just believes in the one God and the other gods are false gods. One thing also about that is just how similar its culture is to Mesopotamian culture in general. So you want to keep an eye out for that. That some aspects they have a lot of similarity. Let me go back real quick. Again, you're going to be able to go through this. I'm just highlighting the major stuff you need to know for the exam. Um, One of the things that happens as you come out of Sumer um, is that what we call civilization um, focuses on the growing urbanization of this territory. So you're actually seeing like actual cities developing, um, and I mean you see the contention in this even back to some of the Mesopotamian myths like the Epic of Gilgamesh, where it deals with the friction between the country people and the city dwellers. So that's something also when you're reading to keep an eye on. Um, you'll see the development of like a substantial monarchy where it moves away from the presence of like this priest king type figure into the Babylonian king Hammurabi. So that's one reason I'm having you thumb through some of Hammurabi's law, because it's the first time you get, at least on record, you have somebody setting up a law system where the king's presence isn't need to be immediate to the situation, that he can rule from afar and the law does its job in structuring society. And one thing you'll notice about the law Hammurabi is how coercive it is. It's very much like a list of don'ts and punishments if you commit certain crimes. Um, yeah. So let me move to this part here. So the other big thing you'll need to know for the exam as well is, as time moves along, you do begin to see the rise of empires. Um, and this does have effect over this region that you're looking at. You can kind of see in both first the Assyrian Empire and then the Babylonian Empire. Um, Basically, this territory is conquered, and this just kind of begins this narrative of the rise of empires in this Middle East and then by extension Mediterranean territory. As we look, honestly, if timeline wise, you kind of see this rise of empires: Assyria, Babylon, Persia, the Greeks, and then the Romans. So that's kind of looking at a future point. And I would just tell you to pay attention to Israel's relation to this, because in pretty much all the cases I just listed, um, the people of Israel, and then eventually what we know of as the Jewish people, will be under these empires. And so you want to pay attention to their capture, exile, and the difference between like what the Assyrian Empire handled the situation in relation to the Babylonians. So that leads us to the Great Persian Empire, and there's a few questions about Persia on your midterm. Persia, as you can see here, is by far the biggest of the empires at this point, right? Just recall, the other two great empires cover a territory about like this kind of U-shaped territory, whereas Persia has all this territory to the very east, borderline with India over here, and goes all the way to like present day on the tip of where Greece begins. So if you think next week when we look at the Greeks, this is going to be a big issue moving forward. But the Persians are really kind of like pioneers in empire, and I think I definitely can see um, elements that the Romans learned from the Persians. First of all, the Persians seem to have a much better understanding of religious. Again, this is ancient world, so don't misquote me on this, but a certain type of toleration for other religions. And you see this with the way um, King Cyrus allows people to return to their homeland from exile that happened under the Babylonians. And so what that does is create, at least this is where you kind of get the exilic Jews going back home. And so you have the Jewish people returning and start to set up their nation once again. Um, and its second thing is how much advanced the Persians were with regard to their empire. The fact that they had it was big. They had these satraps, governors all across the empire ruling and keeping the power systems going along. Again, kind of goes back to earlier comments about not having to have the king be everywhere, kind of omniscient and omnipresent, but that he can kind of rule from afar, and the bureaucracy rules in his place. So that's another aspect of the Persian Empire. And then finally, the religion we know of as Zoroastrianism comes out of Persia, and there's a lot of debate about whether it begins earlier or later. I tend to now think it's the earlier date. Um, and it just tells you that it has this much longer legacy. But this is also a type of monotheism. I would say a type because even though it promotes the one God, it also features a dualistic framework. In other words, it sees reality as a battle between good and evil, darkness and light, and so even though it like privileges the one God, it does have contending demigods going against it. So if anything, it's better to understand it as a type of monotheism, like Akhenaten's worship of Aten. But probably more important is the idea of it being dualistic, and you'll see similar dualisms in other religions, where you'll see religions privileging the spiritual, the soul over the body, the material. So that's a quick rundown of the first lecture, on just highlighting the main points, especially as preparing you for the midterm. But I encourage you to slowly thumb through the lecture as it's located in the module.